As I approach the bus, I'm checking to make sure that it's not leaning from one side to the other. I'm looking for any obvious damage to the bus. I'm also checking underneath to make sure that there is no leaks of fuel, oil, coolant, or grease. I'll check each mirror bracket to make sure that it is secure to the bus. And I'm checking all my lights to make sure that there is no damage to the lenses and that they are all the correct color and secure. I have my 5 amber clearance lights on top, my amber 8-ways, my red 8-ways, amber turn signals, and my headlights. Here on my cross guard, that I'm making sure that it's secured to the frame, that it fully extends, and that there are no leaks in the bellows. Driver's side under the hood, I'm going to check to make sure that the electrical wires are secure, no loose, bare, or frayed wires. Next is the transmission and the oil dipsticks. You check both of those by pulling them out, wiping them off, then reinserting, making sure that they're above the add line. You check the transmission with the engine running, the oil with the engine off. Next we have the power steering pump. I'm going to make sure that that is secure and it is gear driven. Next below here we have the air governor. I'm making sure that's secure and the lines are connected. Underneath the governor is the air compressor. I'm going to make sure that that is secure and that is also gear driven. Lastly, on this side we have the power steering reservoir, which is secure, no leaks. The hoses, no abrasions, bulges, or cuts. And same thing with the dipstick. Check it by pulling it out, wiping it off, reinserting, making sure that it's above the add line. Here is the steering shaft, and it is secure, no cracks. Here is the couplings, they are secure. The gearbox is secure. The bolts are tight. The hoses have no abrasions, bulges, or cuts, and are not leaking. Next is the pitman arm and drag link. Both are secure, no cracks, and the cotter pin is in place. Next we move to the steering knuckle, and it is secure, no cracks. The steering arm, which is back behind here, secure, no cracks. The steering arm is connected to the tie rod, which is straight, secure, no cracks. Next we move to the front axle, which is straight, secure, no cracks. The leaf springs, the front and rear hangers are both secure to the frame. There are no cracked, shifted, or missing leaves, and the U-bolts are not cracked and are in place. The shock absorber is straight, secure, and not leaking. The frame is straight, secure. There is no damage or holes to the frame. And then the cross members, which are here in between the frame, are straight, not shifted, and secure. Here's the brake chamber. It is secure, no cracks or dents, and it is not leaking. The hoses are secure, no ABC to the hoses, and they are also not leaking. Next we have the slack adjuster and push rod. When the brake is released, this should have no more than 1 inch of play, and the push rod is not bent. Inside the wheel we have the brake drum, which there should be no cracks or dents and no oil or globs of grease. And inside the brake drum is the shoe liner, and that should not be worn dangerously thin. Here on the front driver's side tire, the first thing I'm going to check for is that we have 4 30-seconds tread depth. On the front axle they cannot be retreads. You want to make sure that they're wearing evenly and a matching set on the axle. On the tire sidewall you want to check for no ABC, abrasions, bulges, or cuts. On the rim, there should be no cracks or welds. On the lug nuts, you check each lug nut to make sure it's tight, secure, no loose or shiny threads. The bolt holes behind there, you want to check to make sure they're not cracked or distorted. The oil hub seal should be secure, not leaking. And check the valve stem to make sure that it has no cuts and it has a cap. And you would check the tire pressure with a tire pressure gauge. And lastly, mud flap is secure. Under the hood on the passenger side, the first thing we are going to check is the coolant to make sure that it is secure, not leaking, and that the level is above the add line. Next, on the hoses, we are going to check to make sure that they are secure, no abrasions, bulges, or cuts. The alternator is no bare or exposed wires, and this is belt driven. Next, we'll move to the belts, and you're going to check that there is no cracks or frays, and that there is no more than 3/4 inch play in the center of the belt. Next we will move to the water pump to make sure it is secure, and that is also belt driven. Next we'll move to the windshield washer fluid, just making sure it is secure, not leaking, and it is also above the add line. And lastly, we'll do the engine as a whole to make sure that it is secure, not leaking or any obvious damage. And here on this side, I would check the brakes and all the tire stuff just like I did the other side. As I continue around the side of the bus, I'm going to point out that the door light is secure, no damage to the lenses. The reflective tape is present and no damage. Amber turn signal, amber clearance light, amber reflector. Under the bus, I'm going to check to make sure that the drive shaft is secure, straight, no damage, and that the safety hangers are in place and the U-joints have no damage. Here at the rear tire, the first thing you want to check for is that you have at least 2 30-seconds of tread depth. On the rear axle, they can be retreads, but you still want to make sure that they are wearing evenly in a matching set on the axle. You want to check in between the tires to make sure that there's no obstructions and that the wheels are butted together. For the tire sidewall, you want to check for no abrasions, bulges, or cuts. On the rim, you want to make sure that there's no cracks or weld marks. Same thing as before, checking all the lug nuts to make sure they are tight, secure, no loose or shiny threads. The bolt holes behind the lug nuts, you want to check to make sure that they're not cracked or distorted. On the rear axle, you have a rear axle seal. Again, you want to check to make sure it's secure, not leaking. The valve stem has no cracks, has a cap, and you would check the tire pressure with a tire pressure gauge. And lastly, the mud flap is secure. Here I would check the shock absorber and the airbags to make sure that both of them are secure and no leaks. I'll check the leaf springs just like I did up front to make sure that they're secure, no missing, cracked, or shifted leaves, and that the front and rear hangers are secure to the frame, U-bolts in place. On the rear axle, I'm making sure that it is secure, straight, no cracks. Check the frame just like I did up front, that it is secure, straight, no broken welds, cracks, or holes. Again, the cross members are secure, straight, not shifted. Stop. Here at the fuel door, I'm going to make sure that the cap is tight, that there is no leaks, and that there is no damage to the fuel cage. Continuing around the bus, I will point out the red clearance light, red reflector. Here at the back of the bus, I'm going to start with the strobe light on top, making sure that it is secure. I have my 5 red clearance lights, amber 8-ways, my red 8-ways, my reverse lights, my combination brake tail lights, amber turn signal, red reflector, my reflective tape, and my license plate is secure. I'm checking my exhaust pipe to make sure it's secure, no excessive soot buildup, and that it does not extend more than 2 inches past the rear bumper. And I will open my rear exit door to make sure that it opens and closes freely, and if the bus was running, an alarm would sound. Continuing around to the side of the bus, I'll point out my red reflector. Again, my reflective tape is all secure and visible. I would check my rear dual and brakes just like I did the other side. Continuing to point out my amber reflector, amber clearance light, amber turn signal. Here at the stop arm, I'm going to make sure that it is secure, that it fully extends, no damage to the lenses, and that the bellow is not leaking. Here I would point out my circuit breaker box. Make sure you tell them that this is a circuit breaker bus. It does not have any extra fuses. And here, point out my battery box. They're all secure and there's no excessive corrosion. First, with entering the bus, first thing I'm going to talk about is that the stair light is secure, no cracks or damage to the lenses. You want to open and close the doors, making sure that the left side closes first. I'm looking at the stair tread to make sure that there's no loose tread, and I'm checking the handrail to make sure that it is secure, and always using the handrail when entering and exiting the bus. Now we're inside the bus and we're going to check our passenger items, starting with the fuses. This is a circuit breaker bus, so there is no extra fuses to check for. Next we have our insurance card, our body fluid kit that is fully stocked, our first aid kit that is fully stocked. We have 3 hazard triangles that are secured to the base and not broken. We have our ABC rated fire extinguisher, which is secure. The needle is in the green, the pin is in place, and the hose has no abrasions, bulges, or cuts. After turning the key to the on position, the trainee will check the floor tread to make sure that it's not loose or excessively worn. checking the seat frames to make sure that they're secured to the base on their way to the back of the bus. Once they get to the back of the bus, they will open the rear emergency exit and the alarm should sound. Opening and closing the door to make sure that it operates and sounds. Next, the driver will say that they would check the 4 emergency exit windows and the 2 emergency roof hatches the same way that they check the rear exit. On their way back up to the front, they will be checking the rear seat frames to make sure that they are secure to the floor and the windows to make sure that there's no cracks or damage. After returning to my seat, the first thing that I'm going to do after turning the key off is checking my seatbelt to make sure that it latches securely and that there's no cuts or frays to the seatbelt. Next, I'm checking my windshield to make sure that there's no cracks, damage, or obstructions. And I'm checking all of my mirrors to make sure that they're adjusted for me, including the student mirror. Next, I'll turn the key to the on position to make sure that the ABS light comes on and goes off. The ABS light is on. And now it has gone off. Next, we are going to do a safe start, making sure that the bus is in neutral and that the brake is set. We'll go ahead and start the bus. First, I'm going to start by checking all of my gauges, switches, and indicators, starting with my front heater, low, high, passenger heater, low, high, rear heater, low, high. Next, we'll check the defrost, making sure it's set to defrost, turning it to low, checking to make sure it's blowing hot air on the windshield, high. Next, we'll move to our defrost fans, checking them on low, high, low, high. Next, we're going to check to make sure our amber indicator is working. Our red indicator is working, and our door opens and closes smoothly. Next, we're going to turn on our dash lights, checking to make sure that our high beam indicator is working. Left turn signal indicator is working. Right turn signal indicator is working. Our hazards are working. Next, I'll check the horn. Looking at my windshield wipers to make sure that they're flat against the glass, not worn. Checking fluid first. Checking them on low and high. Next, I'm going to check all my gauges with water temperature, fuel, volts, transmission temperature, and oil pressure, making sure they're all operating in proper range. For the first part of the brake test, I will pump the brakes down to 90 psi to make sure that the governor cuts in. Once the governor cuts in, I will watch to make sure that the governor cuts out at 120 psi. I will know it cut out at 120 psi whenever I hear the hiss. If pressure builds over 125 psi, I would call shop. And there it cut out. For the static pressure test, I will turn the key to the off position, then turn it back on into accessory. I will then release the parking brake, and I will be watching the gauges after the initial drop to make sure that they do not lose more than 2 psi in 1 minute. I will ask the tester to time me. The tester will wait approximately 1 minute. They will say time's up, then I will repeat that we did not lose more than 2 psi in 1 minute. The next test is the applied pressure test. So I will be putting my foot on the brake, and I will hold it, watching the gauges to make sure that I do not lose more than 3 psi in 1 minute. Again, ask the tester to time you. After approximately 1 minute, they will say time's up, and you repeat, I did not lose more than 3 psi in 1 minute. Next is the low pressure indicator, and we are going to fan down the brakes until before 60 psi, a light and buzzer should go off indicating low pressure. There I have my light and indicator indicating that we have a low pressure that came on right at 70 psi. Next, we will continue fanning down the brake for the emergency pop out, and we are going to pump the brakes down until the emergency brake pops out between 20 and 40 psi. And the emergency brake popped out at right about 30 psi. Next, we will start the engine and continue to build pressure back up to a fully charged system. Once we have gotten back to 120 psi and have a fully charged system and have also removed the wheel chocks, we are going to continue the brake test by pulling forward at 5 miles an hour and stopping to make sure that the bus does not pull to the left or to the right. The bus did not pull to the left or the right. Next, we are going to set the parking brake, and we are going to rev the bus up to 1,000 RPMs to make sure that the parking brake holds. And the parking brake is held. This concludes the brake test.